I have been with my wife Ava for 8 years now, but we've been married for 5. She was a single mom of 3 kids when we started dating. She had 2 daughters, now 10-12, and a son, now 16. I've watched these kids grow up. I've read the bedtime stories, done bath time, the first days of school, PTA meetings, all of it. I very much consider them to be my kids, and they've been calling me mom for almost 6 years now. My brother Ivan just had a baby girl with his fiancée Sarah. I love my niece. And my kids adore their cousin. My kids have been the only grandchildren on my side of the family since Ava and I got together, and there's never been a moment where the kids and my wife were treated like they didn't belong. My brother is their uncle, my mom and dad are their nana and pop. The kids see my family as their family, and I always thought that my family felt the same way about them. The kids and I were over at my brother's house just hanging out, and my parents ended up dropping by with gifts for my niece. Ivan laughed when he saw the toys and told our mom and dad that they were going to end up spoiling her rotten. My mom said since my niece is their first grandchild, of course they have to spoil her. My kids were sitting in the living room with all of us, and my youngest daughter looked hurt when she realized what my mother said. My son and my 12 years old didn't fully react to it, but I could tell it bothered the both of them too. Sarah spoke up and said, "Oh, you mean first grandbaby, not first grandchild." My dad shook his head and replied that my niece was their first grandchild. I didn't want my kids to keep sitting there and listening to that, so I handed my son my keys and told him to wait in the car with his sisters. When they were gone, I asked my parents why the hell they'd say that my kids weren't their grandchildren, and my mom said they couldn't be their grandchildren because they weren't really my children. My wife and I were going to be hosting Thanksgiving at our house this year. But I told my parents that if they didn't view my kids as their family, then they could just host a meal at their own house with their real family while I spent the holiday with mine. I left before they could say anything else to me, and my wife and I have reiterated to the children that they will always be my kids and I will always be their other mom, regardless of our DNA. My brother is pissed at me now because he thinks I reacted too harshly, and that I should try to see where my parents are coming from. My mom texted saying that she and my dad love the kids, but they still aren't their grandchildren, and she hopes that we can come to understand that because she doesn't want this to ruin my niece's first Thanksgiving. I haven't replied back. I meant what I said, but I'm worried that maybe I'm reacting too harshly. Me and my wife have been together for about 6 years. We get along wonderfully and through everything, have never had any major fights except for one thing. I personally feel like my wife makes no effort to get along with my friends. Now, to give context, all my friends and I went to the same university for undergrad, 3 guys and 3 girls that are married. My wife is the only one that did not have this common trait of attending undergrad between the 8 of us, which is really not a big deal if you ask me. Early on in our relationship, my friends would always try and be friendly to her and talk to her when we would mutually hang out. My wife was cordial, but you could tell that she was uncomfortable. I would speak with her about this, and she would always comment that she was an outsider to all of us. This always personally made me slightly miffed because I felt that my friends always made an effort to include her and make sure that she wasn't singled out. Throughout the years, my wife would attend events with me but would seem distant and would sometimes skip group events to hang with her college friends if she had something else planned. My friends never said anything but were always nice and treated her kindly. Well, this week I got a group text from my friends about planning a group vacation to somewhere next year. I quickly noticed my wife wasn't on the group text and asked about it. I got a call from one of my friends who basically said that they didn't invite my wife because, based on all the previous interactions, they didn't think she would want to attend. Even if she did want to attend, her attitude is crappy and they don't want it to ruin the vacation. I thanked my friend for his honesty and told him I'd think about it. And while I love my wife, I figured she more than likely wouldn't want to go on a vacation with them, so I told my wife about the trip, and she asked about details. I told her that while I was invited, she wasn't, and it wasn't because of anything she did, but because they thought she wouldn't want to attend. Well, this statement just seemed to about how she is an outsider. She said that because of the history us 7 had together, she had no chance of ever being a part of the group. She then went on a rant about how my friends are awful people and that she deserved to be invited even if she didn't want to be there because she is my wife. I sat there and listened to her vent, and then finally I calmly told her that it was pretty much her own fault for not being invited, because she had taken such a hostile stance with them from the get-go. She became a self-fulfilling prophecy about being an outsider. That's paraphrasing, but something along those lines. She left the house and went to her mother's. I haven't spoken to her in several days despite texts and phone calls to try and talk to her. I probably should have been more diplomatic about what I said, but I do feel my friends have been treated unfairly. Am I the asshole? I have 3 children, my partner and I both work, but since my hours are more flexible I've picked up most of the childcare, such as dropping the children off at school/childminder, picking them up, taking them park, doing homework etc., as well as 50% housework, so meals, ironing etc. My partner will help, after a little nagging, as well as usually taking the children out to the park at the weekend. Last week I didn't feel good, but come Saturday and I felt awful dizzy, headaches, hot flashes, etc., and was just so tired, so I asked my partner to care for the children that day. My 3-year-old is clingy. She gets upset whenever I leave the room, as well as going through a phase where apparently the only word she knows is no. My partner was in and out asking for me to handle it. My 6-year-old has a habit of asking me to do something or where something is whilst not even considering asking their dad. Partner came in and asked if I'd help settle my youngest as she was requesting me. I refused and may have snapped that he's her dad and to leave me alone. I will admit my final fuse was when my 6-year-old came in crying because apparently my 8-year-old was looking at him funny, so I told him to ask his dad, and when he left I locked the door. My head was killing me, especially around a crying child. My husband woke me up very upset. Apparently at nap time my youngest wouldn't settle without me. My middle child was upset because he thought he'd upset me. My partner was like, I know you're sick, but just offering cuddles to the children would have been nice and I needed help. You know, youngest gets upset without you and apparently you're the only one who calms her down. It's not that he's not around that she's unsettled. It's just natural for children to pick one person, and the doctors have said she'll grow out of it. My partner is upset, although even a week later I'm still feeling dizzy with hot flashes. He just wants an apology, but I don't feel like I need to. Am I in the bad here? I was at the butcher looking for some cheap meat to use for tacos at my housewarming party. My wife got me a kick-ass new smoker and I wanted to try it out. The butcher mentioned that he had some beef tongue and beef cheeks. I went weak in the knees. I love those cuts of beef. So much flavor. And proper barbacoa is made from that, so I picked it up. I prepared it the way I was taught by my grandfather. It was awesome. Smoking it makes it so tender. I made tortillas from scratch as well. We had our party and everyone enjoyed the food. Until my wife's brother's girlfriend asked for the recipe. I declined because it was my family recipe and I don't like to give away recipes. I have in the past and I end up getting crapped on because it doesn't taste as good and I must have sabotaged them on purpose. No, Madison, I didn't sabotage you. You used cinnamon powder in your chili instead of a couple of cinnamon sticks like I said. My wife told me to please play nice and share. So I wrote out the recipe for the girl. She immediately starts dry heaving like she is going to hurl. My brother-in-law comes over to see what's going on. She screams that I serve dog food for supper, so everyone starts asking what she means and she starts waving the recipe around and saying that beef cheeks and tongues are what she buys for dog snacks. No one else complains. They all say she is being ridiculous and that the meal was great. She is left there crying and being comforted by my brother-in-law. Now she is flaming me on Facebook, calling me names and saying that just because I ate peasant food growing up is no reason to feed it to others. I feel kind of guilty because I thought I was doing a nice thing making authentic food. But I guess I might be an asshole for serving cuts of meat that Americans don't think is fit for human consumption. I was having dinner with my best friend in a very popular restaurant in our city. It's one of those pink/full of flowers restaurants, those aesthetic ones. While we were sitting there dining and minding our business, a couple dressed as bride and groom comes in. They were having their day after photo shoot around downtown apparently, and also stopped at the restaurant to take pics because of the aesthetic. Now I didn't particularly mind their presence. They did their thing. When I started getting annoyed though was when the photographer asked us to move seats for around 15 minutes so he could photograph the couple at the booth we were sitting, because it's one of the most famous parts of the restaurant. We kindly declined as we were already dining, having a table full of meals. Plus the restaurant was packed, so only a couple of really small tables were empty for us to sit. The photographer kept insisting that we should pause for a while and do this favor to the newlyweds. We kept declining. Then the couple stepped in and both of us started begging us and how special it is that they take pictures there. My friend and I said we understand it might be special, but this is a restaurant. They don't own the restaurant and can't just have people move seats just like that. The groom ended up yelling and asking for the manager to step in and move us. The manager declined since we was not getting any share for having the restaurant used as a photo shoot place, and also defended us by saying that he won't move paying customers so that the couple can occupy the place for free. The bride was tearing up and said how we are heartless for ruining this for her and making her upset one day after her wedding. They eventually left. My friend and I felt no shame for what we did, but when we told our other friends they said we lacked compassion and it was just a nice gesture we should have done to make someone happy. Am I the asshole? I've recently had an almost obsessive urge to reorganize everything in my home. My library is one of the places I felt needed to be changed ASAP, so I asked my husband multiple times if he would help me, as my shelves are pretty high up and I have a lot of books that are heavy to move. He kept telling me he would help me later as he was busy. It felt like later was never coming, so I finally decided to just do it myself while my husband was working. My in-laws came to visit us and they walked in on me grabbing books from the higher shelves. They thought what I was doing was dangerous and that I could have fallen. My husband also freaked out and kept telling me to get down and saying I shouldn't be carrying heavy things. My father-in-law asked me why I hadn't asked somebody else to move my books for me, and I told him I did ask my husband, but he wouldn't help me. He did try to correct them that he said he would help me later, but his parents told him off for not doing it for me. He thinks I made him look bad to his parents and is upset that I didn't correct them and because I didn't wait for him to reorganize my library. We keep arguing because I told him that he didn't help and that I didn't want his help anymore and I would finish the library myself. Am I the problem here? My ex-husband's son Caden was born during the course of our marriage and I was in a vulnerable space, so it didn't make sense for me to leave. Caden's mother got institutionalized a few months after he was born and my ex got full custody. Now I wasn't a mom to him at all, just a responsible adult who cooked meals for him, kept him safe and looked after him when he was sick. I finally left. My situation was Caden was 3 and I still babysit Caden sometimes because I'm the only one he feels comfortable with other than his own daddy. Now after struggling with infertility for years, I had a surprise baby with my friend Will. It was a shock for both of us, but we decided to embrace the gift and co-parent together. Will is my best friend and his son Aiden, 5-year-old, is a doting big brother to my daughter, now 7 months old. The other day I was babysitting Caden for a few hours when the kids, Caden and Aiden, got into a fight over my daughter. Caden told Aiden that my daughter was his sister, and not Aiden's. I gently explained to him that even though he was not my daughter's big brother, he could definitely be her buddy. He was inconsolable. I had to tell him that Aiden was indeed her big brother. My ex is furious with me for telling him that my daughter isn't his sister. He thinks that my comments were harsh and inappropriate for a 5-year-old. I think that my comments were okay. I don't want to confuse a little boy and create expectations and disappointments down the line. Is this not normal? I was at the butcher looking for some cheap meat to use for tacos at my housewarming party. My wife got me a kick-ass new smoker and I wanted to try it out. The butcher mentioned that he had some beef tongue and beef cheeks. I went weak in the knees. I love those cuts of beef. So much flavor. And proper barbacoa is made from that, so I picked it up. I prepared it the way I was taught by my grandfather. It was awesome. Smoking it makes it so tender. I made tortillas from scratch as well. We had our party and everyone enjoyed the food. Until my wife's brother's girlfriend asked for the recipe. I declined because it was my family recipe and I don't like to give away recipes. I have in the past and I end up getting crapped on because it doesn't taste as good and I must have sabotaged them on purpose. No, Madison, I didn't sabotage you. You used cinnamon powder in your chili instead of a couple of cinnamon sticks like I said. My wife told me to please play nice and share. So I wrote out the recipe for the girl. She immediately starts dry heaving like she is going to hurl. My brother-in-law comes over to see what's going on. She screams that I served dog food for supper, so everyone starts asking what she means and she starts waving the recipe around and saying that beef cheeks and tongues are what she buys for dog snacks. No one else complains. They all say she is being ridiculous and that the meal was great. She is left there crying and being comforted by my brother-in-law. Now she is flaming me on Facebook, calling me names and saying that just because I ate peasant food growing up is no reason to feed it to others. I feel kind of guilty because I thought I was doing a nice thing making authentic food. But I guess I might be an asshole for serving cuts of meat that Americans don't think is fit for human consumption.